Welcome to our MOOC on Economics of Gender and Development. We are in the second week, and this is the first module of the second week, that is module 4. And this module is particularly dedicated to the discussion on different methods and approaches to gender economics. We have already discussed some of the fundamental concepts relating to gender and gender economics in the last week, where we have discussed some of the ideas, fundamental ideas related to the differences between sex and gender. And then we have also discussed some of the foundational ideas relating to gender economics, what gender economics is all about, what are the differences between neoclassical traditional economics and gender economics. And this week, we will try to take these concepts further. We will try to deal with in some greater details some of the ideas that we have discussed. And therefore, we will be having the back and forth discussions where we will be revisiting some of the concepts. At the same time, we will also introduce new concepts. In this module particularly, we will try to focus on methods and approaches of gender economics. That is, what are we exactly concerned with when we talk about gender economics? How do we address those concerns? Here, the approach implies the overall perspective, the lens with which we will see different things and themes of gender economics. And method signifies the steps that we will try to follow, and which relates basically to the actual things that we are doing. Let me revisit some of the ideas that we have discussed in last week in order to bring some refresh ideas to our discussion. We have seen that most of the times that we are concerned with gender neutrality in theory, but when we try to see the reality, then we have seen that there are differences, gender reality. So this is the basic idea of introduction of this course, that whereas we mostly concerned with gender neutrality in theory, in reality, the things are highly gendered. When we talk about the gender neutral neoclassical theories of economics, we believe that economic agents, whether they are consumers or producers, they are identical in nature, they are identical in behavior, and therefore they result in identical economic outcomes. Reality, however, reveals that there are systematic gender differentials, systematic and of course persisting differences in economic behavior among male and females. At the same time, the outcomes for men and women are also highly different. So therefore, the gender economics started recognizing these differences, re-examining the received theories of neoclassical economics while bringing the question of gender explicitly, whether the economic behavior of economic agents differs systematically with gender, and if so, then why, and what are their implications. So this is the core of gender economics, and we have seen in our last week some of the ideas related to these themes and issues. We need to understand that gender economics emerged as a response to these limitations of traditional economics, where gender neutrality is questioned, and we bring in the question of gender explicitly, and that is how this is done. Gender economics therefore studies how gender differences shape economic behavior, different opportunities, and also outcome, and how economic systems themselves are structured in gender ways. And over time, gender economics has developed different distinct methods and approaches, each offering different lenses to understand gender inequality in economy, and also to see the theories in fresh lights. In this module, we will try to discuss these different methods and approaches. Let me start with again revisiting the gender neutral economics. That is a starting point, and this is important because then only we will understand that how gender economics tried to critique these gender neutral economic theories. We have already seen in the last week our core assumptions of gender neutral economics, And we have seen that in neoclassical theory, mostly, we are concerned with individual behavior, individual action, individual rationality, and then we believe that they are identical, they are homogeneous, and they are rational, and they are guided by their self-interest. All right. So therefore, in neoclassical economics, that which is mostly gender neutral, we tend to believe that individuals are rational, self-interested, and identical. And given these gender neutral, identical individuals, their choices, their preferences, when they operate in the market, which is again, does not recognize the difference of gender, and we believe that their interactions, the gender neutral economic agents' behavior and their actions, when they operate in the market, that will lead to equilibrium based on the identical behavior, where households will act as single unified decision-making units, and resources within the households are shared fairly, and in general, all the resources are utilized fully. So these are the core assumptions of neoclassical economics, and with these assumptions and with these core ideas, we discuss, theorize, and try to understand and explain the economic behavior, economic action, economic outcome, and so on and so forth. And when we discuss in this framework, then obviously the methodological tools that we are having will be the mathematical modeling, where, of course, when we have a variable or when we have parameters, they will not be recognized in terms of their gender. So we have the mathematical models which are gender neutral. Then we try to optimization tools. We have different supply demand models, including, of course, the labor supply. And then when they operate demand and supply in the market, and then we have the market equilibrium and market outcome. So these are the methodological tools of neoclassical economics, where gender is not recognized. We do not consider gender as explicit, factor in understanding the economic behavior, action, and results. So that's the starting point. And as we proceed in this module, we will see that how gender economics actually try to attack and critique each of these core assumptions and methods. We have already understood quite clearly that in this gender neutral economic framework, there are a lot of limitations, where we exclude the women's work, mostly unpaid, and then these are excluded from economic measurement and framework. In fact, GDP does not recognize the unpaid work of anybody, and which are mostly done by women. And we do not recognize the power relations that exist within the household. We believe that they are fair and all the resources are fully utilized, both within the household and outside, which is also not true. And gender roles are treated as natural, and therefore it is irrelevant to bring in explicitly into the economic discussion. So therefore, we need to understand that gender economics, in a sense, try to critique all these assumptions and methods. If we look at the beginning of gender economics, we will have to go back to 1970s. 1970s is a period in economic history where we have seen a lot of movements, lot of different movements taking place, including women's movement. There were questions of rights, there were questions of equality, and all those things were discussed explicitly and overwhelmingly in 1970s. That period, we can term it as a descriptive and comparative gender analysis, where we tried to make women visible in economics. In 70s, when people started writing about it, it actually indicated a major shift towards gender awareness in economics, when scholars began systematically to document the differences between men's and women's economic roles. And of course, their behavior, differences in their action, differences in their outcomes, and so on and so forth. So this approach did not initially challenge the economic theory as such, but mostly limited to the providing empirical evidences regarding the visible differences that exist between men's work and women's work. And one of the greatest example in India during this phase is the famous path-breaking report titled as Towards Equality, published in 1974 by Bina Majumdar and their colleagues, highlighting the disparities between men and women in education, employment, health, and legal rights, which became a foundational text in women's studies and also become instrumental in women's movement during that period. So this is the incipient stage of gender economics where focus was to document empirically, provide data which will make the differences visible between the men's and women's work, men's and women's situation, men's and women's context and conditions. So the methods used during this period, where we have this descriptive and comparative gender analysis in 1970s, that included the sex disaggregated data, that most of the data tried to be provided by men and women, that how men fares and how women comparatively disadvantaged. And then we have done a lot of labor force surveys, including NSSO, National Sample Survey Organizations, where we have seen that different roles performed by men and women in labor market. Then we have also got very good empirical evidences regarding the disparities that exist in earning between men and women, and also the other indicators, social indicators relating to health and education, regarding their achievements and attainment, how men and women were different. So these were the fundamental methods that were used, mostly concentrating on the disaggregated data and disaggregated empirical surveys, providing the visible differences between men and women. So what were the key features? It highlighted the gender gaps in wages, employment, education, and it demonstrated the women's contribution to the economic production. That they are saying that for the first time, it was started to recognize the economic contribution of women, and therefore they advocated during this phase and influenced the early policies for making those policies and programs more gender sensitive. However, it has got certain limitations because it was focusing mainly on the outcomes rather than causes and processes and inputs, and treated women as a single homogeneous group. It did not recognize the differences that exist between or among women, and it does not adequately analyze the deep power relation that exists in the household and as well as in the society. But nonetheless, it was important because this is the phase where these differences that exist between men and women become visible. People started talking about it, people started acknowledging it, people started recognizing it. Then came the 1980s, where we have started to look at the households in a more sensitive and deeper lenses. And that phase is known as the household bargaining approach. During the 1980s, the economists began questioning the assumption that household function as a harmonious, homogeneous units. So that was the foundational assumption of neoclassical economics, that household is a unit which is homogeneous and harmonious. There is no difference within the household. So that began to be questioned. And then they have started arguing that households were recognized as a spaces where members have different interests and unequal power. So not all the members of the households are same, not all the members have same power and interest, and therefore they started challenging the unitary household model of the neoclassical economics. So what were the core ideas of household bargaining approach? The core ideas included, the first, the men and women have different preferences and also different constraints. And therefore, anybody who is looking at the constraint preference maximization or utility maximization, they have to recognize that all the preferences are not same. At the same time, constraints are not also same among men and women. They have started arguing that the outcome mostly depends on the bargaining power, that how power relation works and how men and women bargain, and that bargaining power can influence income, the asset ownership, employment opportunities, education attainment, social norms and legal rights, and so on and so forth. So therefore, differences which were visible in 1970s were tried to be explained by the differential bargaining power among men and women. during the 1980s. And they have used methods like household surveys and inquiries, and also the very huge application of game theory, where cooperative and non-cooperative game models were used to explain how different situations can result in different bargaining results between men and women when they place different preferences and different constraints. What was the contribution of this phase? This tried to explain the unequal distribution among men and women for most of the economic inputs as well as outputs and outcome. And they have tried to link the women's empowerment and independence to well-being, that if you want to improve the condition of women, then there's a requirement of giving certain amount of autonomy, certain amount of economic independence to women. And they introduced for the first time the different power relations that exist within the society, within the household, into the economic analysis. The limitations, however, included that they have assumed that negotiations that take place between men and women are often rational and also fair, which does not hold true in most of the cases. These are biased and influenced by larger questions of power. And also, it was faced or challenged by the empirical difficulty in measuring bargaining power. So that was the 1980s. So in 1970s, we have started recognizing the differences, and 1980s we tried to sort of explain that why there is a difference between the results that we have seen in earlier decade, and it was seen in terms of the different power relations, different bargaining power that works among the men and women. All right, so that's the 1980s. The major paradigm shift, however, came in the 1990s, when we have the feminist economics, completely different discipline, which is known as the feminist economics. It has to be understood that feminist economics does not simply add women into the existing models. Rather, it redefines what economics should study. It challenges the focus on markets, efficiency, GDP as the key categories and concepts. It included the contribution from Nancy Flovey and Marlene Waring. They have started arguing that these are not the actual concepts and categories which should be limited to, and therefore they argued that the markets essentially are embedded in social relations, and then have seen that work does not only recognize the paid work, it has to be recognized the unpaid work as well. And economic success or achievement should not include only GDP and then growth and production and so forth, but it has to include larger questions of well-being and equity. So there's a shift in terms of the focus, shift in terms of choice of subjects during the phase of feminist economics. The methods they used included, which we call the methodological pluralism, where different methods were used in historical, institutional analysis, qualitative, quantitative, mixed methods, econometrics, mathematics, and statistics. They have used all. It actually proves the point that the gender is such a multidimensional subject that you cannot actually restrict yourself to only one methods or methodological apparatus. And they have extensively used time use surveys, that how and under what conditions people spend times on different activities, what are the different activities which are being done by the men mostly and also the women. And they have also tried to sort of make micro accounts or satellite accounts for unpaid work. What are the different kinds of unpaid work done by women that is also contributing to or supporting or supplementing or complementing the economic productions. They have also questioned the institutional ethical analysis. They are explicitly saying that this is not value neutral. They are very much value laden. They are for equity. They are for inclusiveness. And they have also applied interdisciplinary orientation. The contributions were immense from the feminist economics. It has not only made the paradigm shift in terms of changing the focus and then also the bringing the interdisciplinary and plural methods into discussion of economics. It has recognized greatly the unpaid care work and its valuation, and it has critiqued the GDP as welfare indicator, It has emphasized on cooperation, care, and social reproduction, and therefore, consequently, the shift occurred in the form of a shift from efficiency to equity, and it has pushed the boundary of scope of economics and encompassed a large number of subjects within the fold of economics. And what it resulted after the 1990s, that huge discussion on care economy and social reproduction. One of the most influential contributions of gender economics is this care economy, which includes the activities essential for sustaining life and labor, but excluded from the national account. They have provided very key insights to the unpaid care work, which are done by women mostly. And then these are resulted from how they are linked to gender socialization, which we have discussed in earlier discussions, earlier week, and also the power relations. They have tried to understand why there is a limited performance and participation of women in the labor market. They have used the time use surveys. They are saying that time available to participate in the labor market for women are extremely limited because they are occupied with the household chores, and therefore they have limited time for participation in the labor market. So therefore, they have questioned that this exclusion of unpaid care work, and they have explicitly mentioned that economic growth depends on invisible care labor. Unless and until that is done by the women and takes care of that, you cannot have growth and production taking place. In fact, I am reminded of a very provocative book by Catherine Markell. The title is Who Cooked Adam Smith Dinner? So therefore, it actually provokes the idea that for being Adam Smith, to write about economics, that somebody has to cook for Adam Smith as well. So if you exclude that part, then it will be not giving you the fair picture that how production actually takes place. For production, you need to sustain life, and that work needs to be counted for. At the same time, it was followed up by institutional political economy approaches. It has studied the institutions and then trying to understand the gender nature of these institutions, and then how laws, markets, states, and customs are structured in gender ways. They have studied the property rights, they have studied the labor laws, they have studied the welfare measures, and they have found that it is actually hugely gendered structure of institutions, which are also important to understand the differences that we see visibly in a lot of economic areas. The methods they applied included the comparative and historical analysis, institutional studies, the policy analysis, and the major contribution of this phase was linking the micro behavior to the macro level structures, and also for advocating the more gender sensitive policy designs. Then from 2000 onwards, people have started writing about intersectional approaches, where the homogeneous women category was questioned and intersectionality was recognized as one of the most important areas of study. And then gender does not operate in isolations. They have argued that economic outcomes are shaped by intersections of gender with class, caste, race, ethnicity, and location. So they have adopted the methods of highly disaggregated data, qualitative framework, and case studies. And the significance of this phase included the rejection of the idea of universal female experience, homogeneous category of female, and this became extremely important for societies which are having hugely and deeply entrenched social hierarchies like India, where caste, and all these things are extremely important. And then most recently, we have the study of experimental and quasi-experimental methods. What is basic idea of this quasi and experimental method is the belief that you need to understand the difference, what causes the differences, whether actually in reality there is a difference of preferences, there is a difference of behavior, consequently there is a difference of outcome. So for that you need to control a lot of intervening factors, and that control environment can be done only in an experimental or quasi-experimental setting. So it included the methods like decompositional analysis, randomized control trials, impact evaluations of gender-focused interventions, and one of the key contributor to this approach is Esther Duflo with her husband Abhijit Banerjee has got the Nobel Prize for their work. And also the Claudia Golding, who has also won the Nobel Prize for studies she has done for the labor market and women. So what are the strengths? It has tried to establish the strong causal inferences. It has got extremely policy relevance, but at the same time, we are also confronted with the concerns like it ignores the larger structures of power, and also the focus on only the measurable outcomes, which goes unmeasurable, they remain mostly outside the domain of the study. So let me conclude today's discussion by putting this slide in a chronological order. In the pre-70s, we have gender neutral, and then contributions were from the neoclassical economics. 70s, we have studied the differences, that how women fare in development. In 80s, we have started to understand that why there are differences, and we have studied the household bargaining power. In 90s, we have started feminist economics, where not only they were made visible, but they were also tried to be recognized as the subjects of the study. And then in 2000 onwards, we have the care economy coming up in a huge way, and then pressing demand for recognizing those economics, valuing those economics. And 2010 onwards, we have the studies related to intersectionality and experimental settings. So that is the chronology of the gender economics. And if you look at the methodological chronology in different approaches and then key methods, then you will find that neoclassical, we are focusing on individual choices, mathematical models as a method. Descriptive, it tried to focus on the differences and gender gaps, so statistics and data. Bargaining, it tried to explain by the power relations, and the method was game theory. Feminist economics tried to critique the structural of things, and then they applied mixed methods. And then KI economy tried to focus on unpaid work. The method was time use surveys, and intersectionalities tries to understand the multiple identities and their interactions, and key method was qualitative and quantitative. So the summary and conclusion for this module is something like this, that you can actually see that there is an evolution of gender economics. It reflects a gradual but profound transformation of economic thinking, how we think about economics, from treating gender as irrelevant, and discipline has moved towards recognizing gender as a central organizing principle of economic life. Each method and approach, descriptive, bargaining, feminist, institutional, intersectional, experimental, adds an essential layer of this understanding, and together they demonstrate that gender inequalities in economic behavior and outcomes are systematically produced by social norms, institutions, and power relations, not by individual choices and traits. And a comprehensive understanding of gender, therefore, requires not one or single approach, but multiple approaches. And then, of course, they have to focus more on equity, inclusion, and human well-being. So 3 takeaway points for this module. The first of all, gender economics expands the scope of economics. Second, it highlights the structural inequality and provides critical insights in underlying causes. And most importantly, you need to have multiple approaches and methods when we try to understand subject like gender, which is multidimensional in nature. So in this week, we will try to take up this thing. In the subsequent model, you will try to see the differences that is coming up, the gender in development, and then of course, we will try to move to feminist economics. So as we proceed, we will have more to discuss, and thank you very much.